Hello, everyone. Good evening. So happy to be here with you all. I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas, and I serve as the Director of Learning and Community Engagement at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And we're really excited about this special lecture tonight in partnership with the UNC American Indian Center. The American Indian Cultural Garden is a partnership garden between the American Indian Center and the North Carolina Botanical Garden. It was designed with community to create a gathering place to celebrate American Indian cultures and indigenous ecological knowledge, to support American Indian students in adjusting to life on the UNC campus, and to serve as a teaching tool for the greater community. It's located on the western side, near the western entrance of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And the infrastructure development was completed this year, which has been very exciting. And the planting and gardening will continue forward as it does in any garden. And here to introduce and moderate this program today, we have the American Indian Cultural Garden interns, and that includes Kalila Areola, Ellie Prosser, and Kaylee Robinson. And I'm going to hand it over to them now. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our inaugural Seed Stories talk. We're extremely excited to be introducing this hopeful talk series. And we're really excited to have Kristine here with us today. But before we begin, I'd like to turn it over to Kalila to read and say a bit about our land acknowledgement.
Hi, my name's Kalila. So for those of you who don't know, the University of North Carolina stands on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Occaneechi Band of the Satonee Nation, the Shakori, the Ino, and the Sissipaha people. We hope that through our work, we are able to bring honor to the legacy of resilience and resistance that enables us to gather and learn on this land today.
Thank you so much, Kalila. As I said before, this is our inaugural talk in our Seed Stories series, born of the partnership between the American Indian Center and the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And the programming that this is born of has included a symposium last December and various other coordinated workshops that is in total currently being referred to as the Native People, Native Plants programming. And here with us, we have Kristine. We are super excited to have her speaking on her life and a little bit about Kristine. Kristine Nemec is an ecologist at the Tallgrass Prairie Center and a freelance writer and editor. She has 20 years of experience coordinating with interdisciplinary teams as a planner and researcher. Her professional affiliations include the Tallgrass Prairie Center, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Health Effects Institute, and more. She currently lives in Waterloo, Iowa, and is an enrolled Cherokee Nation citizen.
Sionigara Kristine Nemec Dawado Galeleg Jigero Kohig. Hello everyone, my name is Kristine Nemec. I'm glad to be here today. I'm honored to be the first speaker in your Seed Stories series. It sounds like a really great series. All right, I'll go to the next slide. So I'm going to give you an overview of what my career has been like so far and share some tips, lessons learned, so you can learn from my mistakes or my successes and take what you like, but leave the rest. Maybe some of this stuff will work for you, maybe not, but I'll just share what I've learned so far in the 20 plus years of my career. Right, so I am a Cherokee Nation citizen. This map shows the distribution of citizens by state. A little less than 1/3 of citizens live on the reservation in Northeast Oklahoma. Most of us live outside the reservation, and like many people who grew up outside the reservation, I didn't grow up connected to culture. That came up later on as an adult, so I consider myself a reconnecting citizen. And this map shows where the reservation is located within Oklahoma. Tahlequah is our nation's capital. My ancestors lived in the Sallisaw area after coming over just before the removal or the Trail of Tears. I've been told that they were old settlers, meaning they came over just before that. So in the late 1800s, there was an act called the Dawes Act. The Cherokees, like other tribes, communally managed their land. But then the Dawes Act allotted that land. They made all of the land into little pieces that they gave to people who were Cherokee. And they did censuses at this time to see who was Cherokee and give each of them a little piece of land. So this is how I am enrolled because we are a lineal descent tribe. My great-grandfather, James sitting down, and my great-great-grandfather, Stephen sitting down, were on one of these censuses, and that's how you can enroll as a Cherokee Nation citizen. You descend from someone who is on these censuses. So around this time, my great-grandfather was a teenager, and he was assigned a guardian. So what that meant is certain tribal members were assigned guardians, especially minors, because they were told, well, they weren't competent enough to manage their land. And I found in these newspaper articles from the Star Gazette, there's all these series of articles. This is just a few of them. But piece by piece, each of his pieces of allotment land was gradually sold with the help of this non-native guardian. And I'm sure some of these were not in the best interest of the native citizen. At one point, I guess there was a court case where my great-grandfather was against this guardian. I don't know what was involved, but it just indicates that maybe this wasn't the most, ethical or done very well, the sale of his allotment land. My great-grandfather then went to fight in World War I. He earned a Purple Heart. When he came back, he lived on the reservation for a few years, but ultimately he moved to Kansas, where he bought some land there and farmed. So he left the reservation. He was the last of my immediate family who was on the reservation. He went to Kansas, to South Central Kansas. And this is an excellent book that came out last year, The Fire We Carry by Cherokee journalist Rebecca Nagel. It's an excellent read. It reads like a legal thriller. So she talks about how the Supreme Court ruled that the reservations in Oklahoma were never dissolved because the state of Oklahoma tried to say, well, your reservations don't exist anymore. And she does a really good job of clarifying the case. And she adds some personal history because she's actually a descendant of John Ridge and Major Ridge, who signed the Treaty of New Echota, which resulted in the Trail of Tears, because basically they signed over the ancestral land to the U.S. government. And she really has empathy for both her ancestors and the people who ultimately murdered John Ridge and Major Ridge. So I thought it was an excellent weaving of journalism and legal issues, personal stories, and she touches on the allotment system. It's not the main focus of the book, but it was encouraging to see this addressed because I just don't see this addressed in too much news or literature. This is my great-grandfather later in life. This is my father when he was very little on his lap. So my father was only about 2 or 3 when my great-grandfather passed away. This is my grandmother and my cousin Jenny. So my grandmother grew up in South Central Kansas. She went to secretarial school in Kansas City, and then she married my grandfather and moved to Illinois, where they farmed. And these are my parents. My dad, Phil Phipps. My maiden name is Phipps. My mom, Kathy. So they're very young when they had me. My mom was 16 and my dad was 19. They met in Illinois. Once he graduated, he went into the military. He was stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii. And my mom wanted to follow him. So I guess I was born 9 months after they were married. Their honeymoon was in Illinois. Then they headed off to Hawaii. So this was incredibly brave of them, I think, having a child as teenagers, moving very far away from their family in central Illinois. So my mom's of English and Irish, a little bit of French descent. My dad is of Cherokee and English descent. This is me when I was little, on the left in Hawaii, on the right in Illinois. We weren't a family that camped or hiked a lot or fished, but we did go on walks or hikes quite a bit. And I just remember loving to be outside and loving to read. Now, my parents didn't have a college education, but I just remember them reading, and I fell in love with going to the library and reading. And so When I was 13, we moved from Illinois to Omaha, Nebraska. My dad got a promotion and he really liked Omaha. They have a good school systems. He liked the quality of life. So I moved there. And in high school, I knew I wanted to go to college. Like no one in my family had gone to college, but I just knew I wanted to go. So I worked really hard in high school. I got an academic scholarship just based on my grades, and I was good at taking tests, that sort of thing. So I got a scholarship. And I went to the local university, University of Nebraska at Omaha. I started out pre-vet, then I helped a friend's mom study a songbird called the red-eyed vireo, and I fell in love with studying wild animals. So I switched my major from pre-vet about 2 years into my program to environmental studies because I realized, oh, there's a lot to study and learn about the environment. I really got interested in prairie because the university had a prairie preserve. So I know Cherokee are a forest people, but I grew up in prairie states like Illinois, the eastern part of Nebraska, and that's what I was around. It's a very endangered ecosystem. I appreciated how endangered it was. I loved the subtleness of it. It's not as dramatic as mountains or the ocean or forest, but there's a really subtle beauty and all these cool interactions between the plants and insects and animals in prairie. So I really got interested in prairie during college. Toward the end of my bachelor's degree, I did a 3-month internship at a national wildlife refuge just north of Omaha. They're known for their migration of snow geese. So I helped at the visitor center, answered questions. That was a lot of fun. So I was nearing the end of my bachelor's degree and I had this big decision. Where do I want to get a job? I met my husband a couple years before I graduated, and I knew I wanted to stay in Omaha. So it's kind of geographically tied to Omaha. So my suggestion is consider being flexible if you can when you're starting out. For me, it wasn't flexible in terms of geographic location. It was flexible in terms of, well, I need to do something in the Omaha area. So I'd always respected the military. My dad was in the military. All of my great uncles were in the military. So I applied for a job at a consulting firm, a very small consulting firm called Labatt Anderson Incorporated. They were a government contractor. They had a position where I would be dealing with a lot of environmental documents related to Air Force bases. So in the 90s, a lot of the Air Force bases were closed because they realized they didn't need all of them anymore. And they were changed to maybe airports or golf courses or campgrounds, whatever. Like they were retired as Air Force bases. And there's all these documents. I just remember there's a lot of kind of proofreading and looking at documents. I traveled to some of the Air Force bases. But after 9 months, I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do forever. And I knew I wanted to go to get my master's at some point. So after 9 months, I left to work on my master's degree. And I loved being a grad student. My bachelor's degree, I lived at home. I wasn't involved in any activities, which I would recommend at least being in some kind of 1 or 2 clubs or organizations. But I didn't do any of that. I was just very isolated. But grad school was awesome because I was in these little labs, so just with a few other people, and we would go on field trips. And that's the best part to me of pursuing any kind of environmental degree, at least in grad school. We would go to Oklahoma or Wisconsin or northeastern Nebraska to these really cool places, and the professors were so knowledgeable, and we learned about the plants and the animals. And I think it was just a great experience. So this is one of the parties I had. Like I developed friendships I didn't really have as an undergrad. That's my husband next to me on the lower left. He's of Czech and Polish descent, so hence my last name of Nemec, which isn't very English or Cherokee or French or Irish. So that's where that comes from. So I pursued a degree in biology. For my thesis project, I studied grasslands in central Nebraska. I compared the plant and insect communities of restored versus native grasslands that have never been plowed. So again, like toward the end of my master's degree, I had to choose, where do I want to work next? So here's my next 2 tips. If one big advantage of volunteering, especially if you volunteer out in the community, outside of just student groups that just have students, if you volunteer in the community, you're going to meet people who are in the workforce. or you can take classes with people who are in the workforce. And this also relates to another tip I have, which is build your network before you need it. So throughout my master's degree, I started to think of this. I started to do more volunteer work so I'd be prepared for when I graduated. But absolutely, like any opportunity you have where you can interact with people in the workforce, I would suggest taking advantage of it. So what I did, I took a 1-credit GIS class toward the end of my master's from a woman who worked for the Corps of Engineers. And she happened to know of a temporary 5-month position that they had available, and she suggested I apply for it. So I applied for it, and the supervisor knew her. He heard good things about me. So I really didn't have a formal interview, as very informal. And just because it was a temporary position, I was able to get into that temporary federal position. And I was at a regulatory field office, which is a small office of 5 people. And a field office at the Corps of Engineers, they evaluate wetland permits. So on the right, there's kind of a diagram. Certain waterways within the U.S., you need to have a permit if you're going to do any kind of development that's going to affect them. So that's what I did. I kind of helped process some of these permits. And that office with 5 people, they would have to process around 1,000 permits a year. So it's one of the busiest offices I've ever been in, because they had to evaluate every single one, decide, is this going to impact the water of the U.S.? If it is, how are they going to mitigate it? They're going to have to maybe restore a wetland to offset their impacts. So that was my first job. I thought it was very interesting, but they only had funding for 5 months, but they liked my work. They said, well, you can go to another office in downtown, because they have another temporary position. But again, this is what most of the people I know in the environmental field, you start out in these temporary positions just to get your foot in the door. So I went to the operations office for about 6 months. This office is in charge of managing land that the Corps owns along the Missouri River system, all the way from Missouri all the way up to the Montana. So it's a huge area. It's the largest area for a Corps district in the country. And they have dams along the Missouri River that created lakes. So I remember there I worked on master plans, which would describe how the lands around the lakes would be managed. So there's different management units, and they describe, well, in this unit, there's this kind of wildlife or this kind of plants. And I would help edit and write up those plans. So again, it was more desk work. It was more planning. Occasionally we would travel out to these district offices and look at the land itself, but mostly it was in the office in downtown Omaha planning. So some of my coworkers there thought I would be a good fit for another office within the Corps, the planning office, and this is where I finally landed for the next 6 years. So I talked to the supervisor in the planning office and asked if I was eligible for a 2-year internship program. And she said I was. So I was on a 2-year internship program, which is probably also known as a probationary kind of job that has been in the news lately. And after 2 years, I became more tenured. So what I did in the planning office, as opposed to just looking at land that the Corps managed around their reservoirs, I worked with clients throughout that whole region. Some of those were from Native nations. For example, the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe and the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe would come to us with project ideas, and we would help plan those. Lower Brule was interested in restoring cottonwood trees. That was a big thing I worked on, was cottonwood tree restoration when I was with the Corps, designing plans. And one time I got to spend 3 weeks on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Reservation, helping their biologists when they surveyed plant communities across their grasslands. So that was really fun. Another fun project I did was planning this backwater chute and wetland restoration project. This was nice. It was within an hour's drive of downtown Omaha. So we could go out there a lot on site and plan what we were going to do. So I helped decide what vegetation we were going to plant along the banks of these river projects. So the engineers would go out and create the wetlands, create the chutes. And then I would help with the side part, the vegetation part. Another interesting aspect of being with the Corps is that you can choose to be on an emergency response team. In 2004, it was a historic hurricane season. There was 4 intense hurricanes that crossed Florida within the span of a few months. So I went down after the second hurricane. I believe it was Jean. Charlie was first. It was intense. Then there was Jean. And I was on a team that went down there for 1 month. And our job was to find sites where we could put temporary housing. So you can see on the left, there's all these roofs. They're called blue roofs, these temporary tarps you put on houses. And FEMA, we collaborated with FEMA to help protect people's houses from further damage. And we would have to find level sites that where we could put temporary trailers to house people who were displaced. And as an environmental biologist, my job was to go out and make sure there's no endangered species on those sites. I did the environmental assessment. So some of you may have heard of an environmental assessment where you have to decide, are there going to be any impacts on water quality or air quality or wetlands? Or is this, if we're going to put trailers on the site, is it going to impact endangered species? So I went out and I surveyed for a gopher tortoise and some kind of endangered snake. And then I wrote up my environmental assessment. It was very fast-paced work. I remember there's several housing sites I had to go evaluate, write up the environmental assessment saying they're okay. I didn't find any species. And it was just really good people, really fast work, and it was rewarding. I felt really appreciated. It's the most appreciated I've felt as a government employee because when you're out and about and people would see you in your shirt, they'd come up to you, oh, thank you for being here. So in a disaster situation, people tend to be really appreciative when the government comes and helps them. Now, I'm a member of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and in their magazine, Winds of Change, once a year they come out with a list of the top 50 workplaces for Indigenous STEM professionals. So the editors of this magazine create the list based on how often companies recruit in Indigenous places or how many people are in management positions, that sort of thing. So as you'll see, some of these are more technical, they're not really environmental, but some of them are environmental. For example, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is on there, and I did find it was a very friendly place for Indigenous people. I mean, the Corps has kind of a tough history. Their reservoirs have inundated some cultural sites, but I think they were pretty good about hiring Native people to do the cultural resource assessments. Like they've tried to change from their past, and they also straightened a lot of rivers and altered a lot of ecosystems, but over the last 30, 40 years, they've tried to undo some of that and trying to restore some of these hydrology, restore the wetlands. So I thought it was a great place to work. And then you'll see like the USDA Forest Service is on this list, USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And I know a lot has changed. This was done last year, so it'll be interesting to see what this year's top 50 workplaces look like. So I was with the Corps for a few years, but I started to get a little restless. I really enjoyed my job. I had a great supervisor. I was paid well. I had good benefits. So I felt kind of guilty. Like, why do I feel like I want to do something different? This is great. Like, it's stable. It's why? But then I decided I decided to conduct informational interviews. This is a great thing to do at any point in your career if you're thinking of doing something different. I knew I loved prairie. That was my favorite part of my grad program. So I started to think, well, what if I wanted to work with more with native plants or prairie or just something different? So I identified around 10 to 12 people who were doing jobs I thought I might like to do. I contacted them. I just asked them for 20 to 30 minutes of their time. And I said, I was just interested in getting to learn more about what their job is like. So there's a lot of information online about how to do these. I personally have never asked for job leads when I do these. It's just to gather information. But it's a really powerful way to learn about careers. And I found most people, not everyone, I think I had a 75 to 80% success rate. At least that stage of my career, people were very happy to talk to me. So again, it's just before you're on the job market, before you need a job, you can ask these professionals these types of questions. And what types of tasks do you do? What skills are needed? What do you like most? What do you like least about your job? How do you recommend someone who's interested in this job prepare? Do you have any other suggestions? And I always stuck to that 30 minutes. I prioritized these questions. And if some people were really chatty, they wanted to learn a lot about me, but I always ended on time. So sometimes I didn't get through them all, but usually I did. So one of those women used to work for the Corps, and she decided to pursue her PhD, and I decided to do the same because a colleague let me know there was a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln he thought I might want to work with. So I decided to pursue a PhD while still working for the Corps of Engineers full time. So the first 3 years of my PhD program, I would take vacation leave during the summer for about 2 or 3 weeks. I would go out to my research sites in central Nebraska. So these are an aerial view of my research plots, about a third of an acre in size, and there are different seed mixes. And I compared the plant and insect communities of different, like which seed mixes attract the most beneficial insects, like lady beetles, and that sort of thing. So I juggled that for a few years, and that was okay because I was just doing the classes and the field work. So I was able to handle both. But once I get started to writing on my dissertation, that got to be a lot. So 3 years in, I was able to get a National Science Foundation scholarship, which allowed me to leave the Corps of Engineers and just focus on writing my dissertation for 3 years. So yeah, this was a very important part of my career is being able to get one of these, which allowed me to focus and wrap up my PhD, or else it may have taken me a very long time to get it while still working full time. And to me, again, one of the best part of a PhD program, like my master's program, was getting to travel. One of the classes, we went to Australia. And this was really cool, getting to see wild parrots and kangaroos and all the really neat wildlife in Australia. Another part of this National Science Foundation position was we were paid to go to Europe for 3 months. And we were hosted at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. The man on the left was a colleague of my PhD professors. They're good friends. And he works at it's called YASA, is how the acronym is pronounced. And he agreed to host 5 of us for 3 months. So we traveled around Europe. We went to Spain, Hungary, Poland, and another part of Austria. We were housed in Vienna, Austria. And this is where the Institute is housed, in this old palace. And we learned about complex river systems and restoration, how Europeans are trying to restore these river systems. And we also did some side trips. Like we had these official trips where we'd travel around. And then when we had free time on the weekends, some of us would travel. Like this is me in Croatia, which is really beautiful. And also around this time, as I mentioned, I didn't grow up in Cherokee Nation. It always felt like something that was in my past. Okay, that's like genealogy. That's not really something I can participate in. I'm a pretendian if I really try to, learn more beside, learning from books or whatever. But I got curious. I think around my 20s or 30s, I started to subscribe to the tribal newsletter and the tribal paper. And in 2009, I learned that the Cherokee Nation was starting the seed bank of heirloom seeds. And they said enrolled citizens could request to get these seeds for free and grow them. And they were encouraging at-large citizens away from the reservation to grow these seeds. And they said, well, that's how you can connect and be part of the culture. I thought, well, maybe it's worth enrolling. Like I read in the paper about people from New Mexico saying how valuable they thought this program was. So I decided, well, maybe I should enroll. So I submitted my paperwork, my certificates of my ancestors back to my great grandfather, that sort of thing. It was a 2-year process, but eventually I was able to officially enroll in 2012 and then request the seeds. And I started to feel a little bit more connected, like, oh, I can participate. It's encouraged. And later that year, in December 2012, I graduated with my PhD. This is me with my family. I was an only child. My senior year in high school, my parents said, again, this is the same parents. They had me when they were very young, but they stayed married. They're going to celebrate 50 years this year. They said, oh, we're going to have more kids. So they had my sister Caitlin on the right about a year after that. So when I was 19, Caitlin was born. When I was 22, my brother Kyle was born. So this is my family. They were very supportive of me getting my degree. And toward the end of my PhD, I kept applying for all these permanent jobs. It was a rough job market. I wanted to get back into a permanent position like I was when I left the Corps. I thought it's not going to be that hard. I've already been in a permanent position, but I just couldn't find anything. But I was able to find a temporary 2-year position as a postdoctoral researcher in Brookings, South Dakota. So I had to move away from Omaha. My husband and I did a 2-year long distance relationship. And this is what I needed to do to get back into the workforce. And I think part of it was when I interviewed, people would say, well, you've been in Omaha for 25 years. Are you sure you're serious about moving? And I said, yes, I'm serious, but these permanent jobs, maybe they thought I was too big of a risk. Maybe they thought I was going to move back to Omaha. But I was able to get this 2-year position where I studied pollinators, which pollinators visit which flowering oilseed crops. And this was really interesting research too. It wasn't prairie, but I still thought it was fascinating to learn about agriculture and sustainable agriculture and these oilseed crops. And again, that ties into that flexibility. Like this isn't what I prefer to do. I want a permanent position, but at least I got to learn something new. I was still employed in the environmental field. So that's what I did. It was only 4 hours from Omaha, so it was doable to come home about every other weekend. And then toward the end of my postdoc, I was looking at job ads and I found this one advertised that I have now. And I've been in this job for 10 years. So this job that I have now is a program manager at the Tallgrass Prairie Center, which is in Cedar Falls, Iowa. So we're a smaller office. We have the director, we have 4 full-time staff, 2 part-time staff, and we have students and AmeriCorps members. And I really like this environment. Earlier I showed a photo of the federal building in downtown Omaha. It's like 7 floors of cubicles, which is fine. There's a certain energy to downtown, but I really like working in these smaller offices. And I have an enclosed office with a door, and I was just so thrilled to get this position. This is the pinnacle of everything I wanted to do. It's just such a great fit for me. And I was just so thrilled to get this. I mean, it took years to get to some. I enjoyed all the jobs along the way. They're all awesome, but I hesitate to say dream job because I don't want to put anything too high, but it was a great fit and it was worth all the years working toward this. So what do I do at the Tallgrass Prairie Center? I manage the Iowa Roadside Management Program. So in the late 80s, the Iowa legislature created this really forward-thinking legislation where they mandated that native plants are preferred along state and federal highways within Iowa, and they're encouraged. They're not mandated. They're not required along county and city roads. Now, Iowa has very little habitat left. We're probably about the most altered state in Iowa and the country because we have such rich farmland. Pretty much anything that's flat is farmed. But the roadsides are one way you can squeeze some native plants in, and there's some benefits because they help reduce the nutrient pollution from the farm fields. They help reduce erosion on those steep roadside slopes. They provide beauty for drivers. They provide habitat. So it's a very practical applied program, which is what I was always interested in. When I did my PhD, I knew I didn't want to be a professor. I didn't want to be a researcher. I wanted to do some kind of applied work. So this has been great. So in my role, I help support counties and cities that want to do this on their roadsides. So I do that by organizing an annual roadside conference. It's attended around by 100, 120 people. We have field trip, we have presentations. I do public outreach. So this is me at the state capitol. I'll do tables at certain events. Or I'll give presentations to inform Iowans about here's the benefits of planting natives in the roadside. So a lot of my position is outreach or planning events where the roadside managers, so these are people from around the state who manage the roadside vegetation. They come together, they learn from each other. I get to connect them with technical resources so they can do their job. I get a large federal grant to buy native seed. So once a year, I can buy seed in bulk. The counties or cities let me know how many acres they think they'll plant in the next year and a half. They come to the shed at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. They pick up their seed, and then they plant it. It only can be used in the roadsides. And there's a lot of paperwork involved with this, a lot of planning, a lot of steps, because you have to get the right quantities of seed for each species and make sure you're staying within budget. But I think it's really interesting just to see how the seed market changes each year. And it's really fun, I think, just knowing that the seed's going to be put to good use all around the state. 5 years ago, I'm approaching 6 years ago, the Tallgrass Prairie Center agreed to be a host site for AmeriCorps. So AmeriCorps is the domestic version of the Peace Corps. AmeriCorps members can serve either 3-month terms or 11-month terms. So our 3-month members tend to be college students. They can be high school students. We just haven't had any yet. They're usually college students. The summer ones, they help us with field work. The 11-month members will help us more with outreach or maybe creating maps of our trails around the center or all sorts of tasks. But this has been a huge boon to the center. As I mentioned, we only have 7 staff. And having people who can do outreach when we're so busy working on our projects, they can help us really spread the word, get a lot more done in the field. On the right, I mean, trees and shrubs are great, but in prairie, they're not so great because they shade out the plants. Prairie plants need lots of sun. So during the winter, a big prairie maintenance project is cutting down trees and shrubs that come in. So on the right, that's what we had the crew come out and help cut down some of the shrubs. So in the summer, that won't shade out the prairie plants. On the left, we grow prairie root specimens for public outreach so people can appreciate a lot of the value of prairie plants is below the ground. They have these incredibly spongy root systems that hold the soil in place. They're great for improving water quality, reducing soil erosion. So we grow these prairie plants in the ground for 3 years. We excavate them in the summer. The AmeriCorps members help remove them, help them rinse them off, and then we preserve them and give them to nature centers. So they're a great visual. So this is just a couple things that AmeriCorps has helped us with. It's a great program and a great way to get, again, that valuable environmental experience, getting to serve at host sites, getting to interact with professionals, learn fieldwork skills or other skills depending on the host site. Another tip I have is consider having a side hustle. This just depends on your capacity. Not everyone has the capacity to have a side hustle. I've always loved writing and editing. So during the pandemic, one of my diversions when I had all this free time was to create my own little side business doing writing and editing. So in 2000, I started to create my website, advertising my services. I decided to earn an editing certificate, which took a little over 1.5 years. I started listening to podcasts. And there's so much information out there now about how to do a side hustle. There's so many podcasts and websites and webinars, free webinars, lots of free resources about how to do this. And in my case, I decided to do writing and editing. The nice thing about this is it's another form of professional development for me. So I've learned a lot about marketing. I've learned how to network. So if there's some skill you have, consider doing this. It's kind of like, I've heard people say, well, it's like building your own lifeboat, just in case something happens to your full-time job. And it's up to you how many hours you put into it. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. I just have the infrastructure in place so I can do this. And I do writing and editing, scientific and technical kind of editing. And also during the pandemic, as with all my free time, I decided to start taking online Cherokee courses. And this is Ed Fields. He's been teaching online Cherokee courses for at least 10, 12, maybe 15 years. So that's how I started out, was taking his introductory courses to Cherokee. He wrote a book in the last couple of years. It's excellent. So he's just very well known for being a very kind, patient Cherokee teacher. I really enjoyed it. Now I moved on from him and I'm in a discussion group on Wednesday nights, and I take informal online courses from another instructor, J.W. Webster, on Tuesday nights. And I'm aware of an online Cherokee language discussion group pretty much every day of the week. If I wanted to, I could go to Cherokee language discussion group. And this is really encouraging because like many native languages, our language is endangered. We have less than 2,000 first language Cherokee speakers left. Most of them are in their 60s or above. This is the Durbin Feeling Language Center. Another exciting thing about Cherokee Nation and their language revitalization is they converted this casino on the reservation into a language center. And it's really neat because they have some part of it is for young kids, school-age kids to learn. Part of it is for elders to come, and you walk down the halls and you see like the children, the elders interacting, and it's encouraging. They have 1-week immersion classes where anyone can come and visit. I've been to part of some of these 1-week immersion classes. We have a bell outside, and the bell is kind of poignant. They ring the bell when a first language speaker passes away. And it's how they honor them. But that there's just a wealth of knowledge that we're losing every time an elder passes away. But the tribe's investing a lot of money into revitalizing the language, and I feel very hopeful. So another tip, the rest, I just have a few more slides. They're career tips. One is to keep a praise file. This is when you save any appreciative emails or letters you get. It's easy. I think it's easy to keep a file when you get little certificates or awards or whatever, but this is more minor stuff. If you keep it all in one spot, and if you have the self-discipline to remember to write down any verbal compliments you get, this can come in really handy when it's time to market yourself, when it's time to apply for jobs, because this captures the value you provide people, what people appreciate about you. It gives you a boost too if you're feeling really down, like if you make a mistake, or it's wonderful to have all this in one file. It's not egotistical, it just shows the value you're providing people. And you can use that language when you're writing a cover letter for a job or something like that, or interviewing. You know what people appreciate about you. It just makes it a lot easier. You can join a professional organization. These are the ones I'm a member of. The American Indian Science and Engineering Society, it's very broad. So you have like physics people, IT people, computer science. It's not just environmental people, but that's some of the members are environmental. And they have a nice magazine where you can learn about other people. Toastmasters International is great if you have a fear of public speaking. That's how I learned to get out of my shell a little bit more. I'm very introverted and quiet. But Toastmasters was a very supportive environment. It helped me learn to be more comfortable with interviewing and delivering presentations. And then the latter organizations relate to my freelance writing and editing. And then I haven't belonged to these, but they may be of interest. I don't work for a tribal organization. I don't work intensively with tribes. But for those who do, I think I've heard good things about the Indigenous Environmental Network and Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. And if you're more conservation oriented, I'm more ecology, restoration ecology. I think the Society for Conservation Biology can be good. And one of my last tips is be active on LinkedIn. I've grown to really like LinkedIn. There's just a wealth of information about different companies. There's inspirational people to follow, to learn from. If you want to be known, if you want to put yourself out there, you don't have to be this big name influencer and post every single day and want to do viral posts all the time. That's not necessary. If you're just yourself, if you post 1 or 2 times a week, sharing something cool you've learned, or someplace you've been, a conference you went to, or a meeting, or share a book you read, or something, like if you're active on LinkedIn, you'll get a feel for what people post about. But if you post 1 or 2 times a week, that helps get you, the algorithm makes you more visible to other people. You can post thoughtful comments. That also helps with the algorithm, just like 3 to 4 posts a week. You can identify places you want to work, and you can really make yourself stand out if you engage with their posts on a regular basis. Another good thing about LinkedIn is you can identify people to have informational interviews with or coffee chats with. So it's a more proactive way to look for jobs. And I think this is going to be more and more important than just applying to jobs, especially with the job market right now. It's going to be about networking, about identifying where you want to work, networking with those people, making yourself valuable. This can be really powerful. And here's just a few people I follow and just examples. Like I like Emily Warden because she has career advice. It's geared toward mid-career people, but I feel like a lot of it applies to a lot of job seekers. She's very encouraging and has really good tips. I like Dr. Lydia Jennings. She's a soil scientist. Dr. Lara Jacobs, a complex system scientist. And then I like Robert Lewis because he's interesting. He's a Cherokee National Treasure. So some of these people, yeah, just so many interesting people to follow and learn from their posts. So that's it. Just a couple things I should mention. I'd be very cautious about pursuing a PhD. I put a lot of thought into it, and I realized it didn't help me make more money. That's not why I did it. I just thought it was an interesting program, so I did it. And another caveat, I did not have children. I just chose not to, regardless of what level of education I chose to get. It wasn't interesting to me. So that's allowed me some opportunities not everyone will have. But I think I've really enjoyed my career so far, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, before we move on to opening the floor to everyone for questions, We just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your experiences. Um, and it is very comforting as an undergraduate majoring in environmental studies that your process to get where you are was very much not linear. So thank you for that. I literally created a praise file while right when you wrote that down, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the best idea ever. Yeah, so being a garden intern, we were very interested if there were any plants that were significant and important to you that you would like for us to include in our garden.
Oh, that's important to me. I really like bloodroot. It grows in shady areas. That has a lot of cultural significance for Cherokee people. So from the
We
Cherokee
actually
side of,
have that on our list right now.
oh,
So
good.
that is awesome.
It's a good plant. Yeah, I really like how it can be used for dyes, and I just think it's a nice plant to include.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think you can see the Q&A. I think Kaylee has the question.
Do you think the ability to move for a job was important in your job searching? And do you have tips for someone who wants to get into a conservation career but doesn't have the ability to move for state to state for a job? Oh, well, before I do that, please repeat the plant name. Bloodroot. I don't know the scientific name. I'm not very good about scientific names, but I know the common name is bloodroot. Yeah, the ability to move is tricky. It kind of depends on the job market. If you want to stay in a certain area, the job market might determine if you're able to stay within conservation or in the environmental field or not. So I've known some people who just choose to do a different industry while they're waiting for an environmental job to appear. For example, I know someone after she got her master's degree in natural resources, she wanted to stay in Lincoln, Nebraska, but there wasn't really anything open. So she worked for, I think, State Farm Insurance. So she worked for State Farm for something like 5 years. And then an environmental job opened up at the IWT. Then she applied and was able to get into that. I know another person who's driving trucks. They're in Ames, Iowa, but they want to be in conservation, but they can't find anything. So for now, they're driving trucks, but they volunteer. So I think it's okay. It just depends on what you're willing to do. Some people will jump to another industry, but keep up their skills by volunteering, learning as much as they can about the environment while they're waiting for something to open up in their location. Or like I applied for that Air Force document job. It wasn't the most exciting job, but I learned some environmental stuff and I decided to go to grad school. But you can't just, I don't know if going to grad school is just something to do because you can't find a job. So a lot of it just depends on the job market, your skill set, your network, your willingness to jump into another industry. It just varies what you can do if you want to stay in one particular location. So yeah, at one point I did have to move to Brookings because I wasn't willing. I could have gotten a consulting job at one of those huge firms. I just wasn't interested in that. It was worth it to me to do the long distance relationship for 2 years and do something I liked. But it's very personal and up to you, I guess.
All right, another question that we had was how do you, or like, do you have tips for native plants in high traffic areas, such as like UNC's campus? I mean, very different from roadside, but I was curious on like how to preserve like longevity in native plants.
For high traffic areas, it's something that's going to be walked on, or it's just near an area that's going to be walked on a lot.
I guess both. Probably near, because we have a
Yeah,
path through the garden. So not many people will be like walking on the plants. But yeah, I'm curious if you have any tips.
native plants, I mean, they're pretty hardy. I think they'd be fine. I think that the main concern when planting native plants in small areas like that is trying to find plants that do well together and don't get too aggressive. And what exactly those plants are for your area, I don't entirely know. I know in our area, like there's a plant called cup plant that will spread and crowd out other plants. You don't want to include it or include it in very small densities. But I think it's just talking to native plant experts in your area to try to figure out what's going to be aggressive and we might want to avoid in small areas. You have job advice for someone who had a bad experience at work. I love conservation work. But between the stuff that happened to me in my last jobs, I'm worried about taking future jobs in this field. It's been hard for me to balance sharing culture and getting stressed out due to more negative attention that comes with it. Oh, this is tough. Like, if you feel like you can't be yourself and share culture, you don't have supportive people. I mean, one thing you could do, try to remember like interviews, they're not just interviewing you, you're interviewing them. So if you want to still try to apply for conservation jobs, but you don't want to be in a similar situation, I would just try to think of questions you could ask that would maybe help you determine if they might have the same kind of biases or stressors if you share your culture. Like, think of some thoughtful questions if you want to try to still stay in the field. I know it can be, yeah, it can be challenging if you don't feel like you're accepted or people are respecting what you want to share. And again, that networking thing, informational interviews, can you identify, well, I kind of like to work in that office, gotten with the culture. Well, again, like if there's no Indigenous person, that can make it trickier too. But you can figure out what the culture is before you even formally interview for a position by doing these informational interviews. If you can find someone doing a job you think you might want to do, just talk to them 20, 30 minutes and just, again, try to find some questions that can help you decide, maybe not get into really specifics, but how does your employers, how do they treat people from different cultures or whatever questions you can use. Again, it's whether it's formal interviews applying or the informational interviews, you can kind of get a feel for some of this.
Another question. Kalila unfortunately was kicked out because their room is being used soon. But
Oh,
she was curious if you would be able to share your slides with us. And then also she asked if you had any publications, which I know you do, and I looked it up, and you are a part of a ton of publications. So I am curious, what's your favorite one? What was your favorite publication to work on and why?
okay. Yeah, I have different publications. I have scientific publications, which are in scientific or academic journals about research. Then I have some publications that I've published in magazines or websites for the general public. I actually think one of my favorite ones for the public, oops. One of my favorite ones for the public was writing about biodegradable erosion control products, which doesn't sound like the most exciting thing, but what I liked about it is they're widely used. Like, think about all the roads around the US. What kind of erosion control they use affects the environment. If it's plastic, it breaks down and gets into the streams, or it can strangle the wildlife. So getting to elevate the voices of people who are trying to use biodegradable erosion control products and really get those widely used within their state, that was actually really rewarding because that's very practical. If I publish that article and maybe other states will learn, oh, maybe we should use those and it's less harmful to the environment. So that's a widespread environmental impact. Like, hopefully I got some people to think they could change the way they do things. So that's my favorite, I guess, article for lay audiences. And then my scientific papers, they're easier to write, but they're not as fun because I just like to reach the public. But maybe about my master's research because it's my favorite one. It's really rewarding to get that published. Oh, I see. Oh, is there any question I should answer next? Any particular one?
I think Francis had a question about if there were if you've done any plantings that were specifically for erosion control.
Most of the roadside plantings, that's one of the main reasons the counties want to plant them is for erosion control. So I design the seed mixes, like what I give the counties as far as like what proportion of what species. Again, keeping in mind we don't want certain ones to get too aggressive. So some of those you kind of knock back as far as how much you put in. But yeah, I think that's what we give. That's the main reason the counties want the seed. It's not for so much for the habitat or the beauty. The county governments want to control erosion. So that's what I try to do, is provide good erosion control seed mixes.
And then Marissa sent me a question. She was curious what the status of Cherokee Nation's seed program is, and is the tribe still distributing seeds to citizens?
They
And are you
are.
planting them?
They are still distributing them. I started out with beans, and lately I've been switching to gourds, which are a lot of fun. They have these big, beautiful flowers, and they're just a fun plant to grow. I think they have big leaves, and they're kind of exotic looking. But yeah, it's become so popular. This year, the seed bank has had to go to a lottery system. So it used to be they would open it up and they'd say, okay, on this date, we're going to accept applications. But then, like last year, within a few hours, a lot of the species were taken. So this year, they're like, okay, we're just going to do a lottery. Not everyone's going to be able to necessarily get it, but we want it to be fair, which is wonderful that there's so much interest. But with drought and everything, they can't always produce enough seed to meet the demand. But it's really encouraging that there's so many people who want to grow these plants.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I think we'll be kind of wrapping up here with the Q&A. Again, thank you, Kristine, for taking your time to hop on Zoom and share all of your knowledge with us. We very much appreciate you over here at AIC. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me, Wado, for having me. And I can give you a PDF of my slides. And yeah, I'm happy to help.
Great. Ellie, Kaylee, and Kalila, thank you so much for moderating. And Kristine, thank you so much for being here. This is really a great presentation. I've been I've had a job for quite a while, and I still learned quite a bit from your presentation. Great tips. So, well, we appreciate you being here. And for folks online, thank you for joining us at this presentation. We have recorded it, and with Kristine's permission, we'll be sending that out to folks who have registered. And we look forward to connecting with you all on the next Seed Stories talk. Yet to be determined, but that information will be sent out the same way as you found this one. So look forward to seeing you all in future talks. Thanks again, Kristine.
Yes, thank you.